And when we further, tried to explore, we found that it is mostly kind of monopolized by large players. So despite India being called a kind of cauldron for startups, and we call ourselves a startup economy, our startups rarely found a way in smart cities. You see 100 plus smart cities have already been rolled out, and how many startups have really made a dent there? A very handful. You can't count more than 10, 20. So that is insignificant when we see the sheer magnitude of startups who claim to be doing innovative work. So C-Dot, being a core R&D organization, didn't feel like deep diving into use cases. We felt that we should grow, like our legacy has been creating an ecosystem where industry thrives. We do R&D and then put it to the industry to take it forward, and use cases should be done by them. So from the very beginning, way back in 2014, we kind of mooted this idea that we will develop the core standardization, will promote standardization, will be the advocate for standardization, and at the same time will create an ecosystem where startups and other industry players, we didn't limit ourselves to startups alone. We felt that many places startups might find it a very humongous task to actually scale the ladder. So in that sense, we felt that it should be open, not only to the startups, but to large organizations also. Come forward, we'll do the hand-holding, we'll take you forward, together we'll create a standardized ecosystem, and then we'll approach the industry in a fashion that they are all interoperable, and the ecosystem should be such that it talks about standardization. So in that process, we went ahead, we started creating our own platform for IoT, and alongside we took all these startups together. And thankfully now it has been institutionalized. We have opened a center of innovation where more than 100 companies have registered. More than 30 odd organizations have already rolled out their applications which are standards compliant. There are more in the pipeline. We are not having enough bandwidth to actually support them, but they are there. At the same time, we have also opened up new schemes for funding also to creating innovative technologies outside IoT as well. So our 4G, 5G solutions, we are creating the incubation centers for them, the organizations who are coming forward with their innovative solutions to develop solutions. So we know that everything cannot be done by a single company. So it has to be a collaborative effort. So that collaboration will yield better results and a faster results. And that has been our thought process, and we are moving ahead with that.
Okay. Thank you, Arindam. I think that's a very encouraging layout of what C-Dot is able to do in India. The very fact that you're able to create that ecosystem is itself quite heartening to know. I'm going to change the order a little bit just to come to Margot. Margot, Arindam just talked about the fact that in the 100 smart cities, we saw evidence of sort of the operation of almost a monopoly kind of situation where big operators were, or big companies were providing all of the solutions. You must have faced the similar situation in the European Union, perhaps still do face it in some countries. How has the European Union dealt with this challenge of breaking the predominance of big players? Yeah?
How much time do you have?
It's a long story.
It's a long story. No, but I remember, just as a matter of anecdote, I remember very well when we were starting to discuss the 1M2M thing here, and indeed we had the idea, the whole idea of this hackathon was, if you remember, to create an IoT app store. Because the whole thing was about precisely to make sure that you could have developments from some things that should be bottom up really. I think your question touches upon one of the challenges I wanted to highlight.
Mm-hmm.
Smart cities has been one of these subjects. Originally, Etsy was working very much on business-to-business standards. So you had suppliers, and operators, but making standards so that networks could be connected, etc. With subjects like smart cities, which is an umbrella for many different subjects, you see the advent of, and it's probably not the case in Sen and Senelec or others or BIS, etc., because you guys have been standardizing refrigerators or user things. But in Etsy, for Etsy, it's been a challenge because it's been one of the first subjects where it was business to citizen and business to consumers. And you're right, we're not culturally ready for that. And because we needed to have the incorporation of population, so not only what you call small guys, but also user, citizens, and so forth and so on, which were not part of the ecosystem. And it's one of the big challenges in general standardization has. I would say broadly with digitalization, if you think all services, including public services, are being provided now online, it means that now you need really the input of the people who are at the other end of the line in standardization. The problem, and we've seen it since this morning, standardization is hard to sell. It's hard to show the benefit if it's not immediately tangible for users. So it is one of the challenges we are fighting all the time with. Now in Europe, there's been some policies to try and address some policy sorry, devices to try and address this. For example, in the legislation on standardization, they've added in an annex official representatives of consumers, of environmental associations, of SMEs, etc., to the standardization. They finance a lot of participation of this. It's progress. It's not perfection yet, provided it will ever be, because it's actually a big cultural shift for everyone. And also, even if you finance and nominate an association to say, okay, I represent consumers, they don't necessarily have the expertise, they don't necessarily have the time, they feel overwhelmed when they arrive in the technical committee, so it's an uphill battle. You're right. Thank you.
Thank you, Margot. I'm going to shift to Lohit. Lohit, you are tech and innovation head at Siemens Advanta. Siemens is a behemoth. It's a conglomerate with a global presence and pretty much leads the pack in many technologies. How do you view the small guys that Margot just talked about? I imagine that a big corporation would look at them as being sort of the cutting edge of innovation that you can absorb into your thinking, in the best case. But is that really the case? And give us a sense of how you would look at that in the building energy efficiency space as an example, just a way to kind of understand how that works. Please.
Hello. Thank you. Thanks for this opportunity, organizers. And so I'm talking on behalf of Siemens here. Coming back to the question, I think we have discussed about the problems what we have in this space of smart city in terms of interoperability, connectivity, the sensors or the products which are supplied. It's not possible that one organization, be it any big size it may, it's impossible to supply to the demands and to solve all the problems. It has to be a collaborative approach, including startups, the small organization, big ones. The world itself is moving towards collaboration, right? So that's the way forward. No one can solve the problems what we have. Each country, be a part of the country, has its own challenges when it comes to implementation, be it installation, connectivity, and then operations, right? So all these are different level of challenges. And as Siemens, we also look forward for the startups to come up with ideas, and we go with partnership with them to bid and implement big projects, right? I can quote few examples. So we were the smart city implementation partners for Dubai Expo, which happened in 2020 and in 2021. We had a lot of Indian startups participated there. it was an ecosystem for us to exhibit how things can work in realizing the smart city use cases in terms of making the buildings efficient, the building operations, and be it any part of the city. It could be the electricity supply, the waste management, plantation, water management, people, parking, any of these use cases. It's an ecosystem of small, big, all scale of organizations coming together, to solve all these problems. So that's how I put it across.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lohit. That helps a lot. That specific example illustrates the point. Kishore, you wear two very important hats. One is that you yourself are an engineer and you're an entrepreneur, so you know how to make things. And you're also an evangelist for standardization. From your perspective, help us to understand at least two key gaps that we need to plug if we need to create this ecosystem for smart city development in the future. Two.
Yeah, so I think first is the standards. My observation is whatever people may harp about standards, the business case for standardization has not been really made to the end-to-end stakeholders. Okay, it's by chance or by experience, by making mistakes, people start understanding the value of standardization. Otherwise, nobody likes it. And I'll give you three stakeholders example. Like young startups, innovators, the so-called the new breed. For them, standard block innovation, they're the de facto standard answer. No, standard block innovation. Now, big companies, talk about behemoths. They only like standard which they have helped evolve. They do not like to change their solutions to comply to something standard which is different. So I'm just talking initial resistance, psychology. Then, but it was when we started doing our BIS work, it was a music to my ear when Mr. Kunal took over as a mission director, and he invited me. He said, Kishore, I heard you are trying to do some standardization around smart cities. I said, yes, what kind of standard? He said, in BIS, I'm not interested in global standard, I'm interested in national. When I told him that we are trying to come up with a unified digital infrastructure approach where all these verticals working in silo will be able to work as a unified, interoperable manner, whether they are device-to-device level or at the platform level, data sharing at the cloud level. He said, yeah, that's what we want. But that was because he had been a CEO of a Pune city where he had faced this problem that when multiple solutions are integrated for a common city dashboard, it takes 1.5 to 2 years to integrate. So I think we still, even today, we find like then mission took over, really, underwritten all the standards in BIS, but still we found really a major problem in the city CEOs or their individuals to proactively participate in standards. That is one of the things. So we need end-to-end...
So one gap is the acceptability of standards.
Understanding the value, not acceptability.
Okay,
acceptability, they do it by compulsion.
Okay.
But that's not the way. They need to understand the value. A business case for this is understanding the value. Second is the innovation itself. Now, the way I look at it, the startups and MSME and big organizations, they play a complementary role in such kind of an ecosystem. There's no competition. Why? Because big companies, they have some large back-end solutions and all that. But when it comes to bringing a lot of small plugins and all that, this is where all the startups and MSME can really add value and to them, because they don't need to redo that. They just need to tell them that, look, this is my basic platform. Can you integrate? You got the solution. Can you just customize it to integrate into my system, even if it's not a standard based? Let's not talk standards right now. Okay, complementarity of these two ecosystems is basically organic, but the point is there's a lot of resistance. There it only goes, but today we hear all the big companies, Googles and all these acquiring small startups. Why? Because of their innovation capabilities, their agility in innovation. I think any organization, any big organization who has understood this, they are quite open, but then they are a bit selective, which for business reasons, I won't comment on that.
Okay, thanks. No, thanks very much. Andreas, are you still with us?
Yes, of course.
Thanks, Andreas. Andreas, next question is to you. Deutsche Telekom is again also a very large telecom company, and I imagine that you deal with a variety of demands from different cities in the country. very smart cities like Freiburg, and also cities with lots of different economic activities like Düsseldorf or Frankfurt. How does Deutsche Telekom view the agglomeration of lots of different demand, and what challenges does that pose to the implementation of standards? I hope that question makes sense.
Yes, it reflects the reality.
Okay.
The point is, let me first of all say, okay, I'm in standards, and colleagues of mine, they are implementing these standards we are working on also within the core, A colleague of mine is working on a product which is based on 1M2M for this reason. So we believe in it. But in fact, some of the previous speakers have already hit the nail. Margot is saying, okay, standards are hard to sell, because it's not a product. We have heard about, let me say, by Mr. Kishore or Narang, for example, that a standard is needed also for foundation for the interworking, and we have also heard, let me say, the reality from Laureate about the small companies, the silos. So what we see is that a lot of companies are coming up, and also cities coming up into demand, provide me a solution based on this and this. And here we have also competition, not among, let me say, different silos, proprietary silos. We have also competition somehow between different organization standards sometimes. So in this respect, I think it's good to have also some, let me say, guidance by policy. So if I look at the European Union, I'm also a fan of renewables, also from private point of view, as also from professional point of view. The EU has issued this Electricity Market Directive, EMD, and also the Renewable Energy Directive, RED, for example. So one of the parties is the, for example, citizen energy communities. So they set, let me say, the direction from the policy point of view to allow, for example, producers and consumers, to sell, let me say, the electricity, the energy directly. So this is the driver we have to have a kind of behavior change to introduce to also cope with the renewable problem of demand and consumption, to bring it, let me say, in a balance. So there's a financial benefit. So on the one hand side, there is also, let me say, dynamic rate plans available now, for example, to issue this plan. And what's needed for all of this is a common foundation, a common language between the producers and the consumers. And for example, we already have something available, let me say, which we use in smart cities in Bordeaux. We have heard about Christophe Collinet, for example. This is a typical use case. Smart cities are typical use cases, for example, where devices from different manufacturers talk among each other. So in the electricity area, we're the same. We see also smart meter manufacturers, and they are implementing. For example, in Europe, implementing also something mostly on proprietary basis, and just parts of it, let me say, based on a standard, making it hard, having really this end-to-end ability to talk to each other. So in this respect, coming to India, to the Indian side, in India, what I learned, and also in other Asian companies, for example, there was already a policy decision and an indication towards, and a recommendation towards different standards or specifications. And so India is in these terms already ahead, because, for example, this common language between the different cities and between the different silos could be, for example, or is 1M2M. So the small startups, they could develop towards this common layer, this common language between the different layers, as nicely also outlined by Narang in his presentation before.
Okay.
So a little bit of help from policy would, let me say, put the pieces together.
Okay. Thank you, Andreas. Yeah, please.
I think Andreas is touching upon a very interesting point. Is we always talk about interoperability, technical interoperability, but there is also a problem with regulatory interoperability, if I may say, because we are trying here to sort of merge, if not merge, at least make work together the transport network, the energy network, and the communications network. And not only there are massive issues between, and Andreas just said it, between different agents which used to operate separately and to make business separately, and now we say, okay, now you're going to have to work together because this is one, etc. It creates a lot of problem because sometimes also the business models are not only different, they are conflictual. And on top of this, you put the regulatory interoperability that you need to take care of because too many cooks ruin the broth, if I may say. And this is often what happens.
Yeah. Can you comment on Indian metering scenario?
Sure. I'll come to you, Kishore. I want to just move to Arindam. Andreas just mentioned, I think I heard him right, when he talked about tariff silos, right? What that triggers is the thought that the startup ecosystem needs some sense of security in terms of being able to earn something so that they can sustain themselves. And if cities are bargaining really hard because there are many people who are offering the technologies, it becomes very difficult for the startup ecosystem. I wanted to know, how does CDOT view this, and what is the kind of feedback you're getting from the startups in terms of being able to secure some revenue streams from the thousands of cities in the country?
Primarily CDOT, doesn't get into the business process, what the startup and the end customer, whosoever is the customer, actually asking for such a solution. But the pain point of the startups is that the initial funding that is required for them to create solutions. Second pain point is that the opportunities for the business should be open to them. Currently, the doors are all closed, right? If the RFPs and the tenders, they ask for experience of larger volumes and significant time. So how would the startup be able to fulfill that particular kind of criteria to be able to even quote for a particular tender? So the tenders mostly are articulated, first of all, without the reference of any particular standard to which these particular startups which we have mobilized to actually come forward and be a partner of CDOT in the standardization and standard-based solutions. So they should be able to quote and compete for these kind of solutions. Once they are allowed to compete, I see a lot of confidence in them that they will make their way for making the money themselves because they are smart guys. Secondly, now I missed that part of the question in the first go regarding what I expect for collaboration with the EU part. India, though being very different geographies, have a lot of similarities that I have known with my association with our friends out there. A lot of problems which they face, they might seem way different, but they are not. At the core of it, the problems are similar. And if our startup community can provide solutions for those geographies and vice versa, there will be a lot of exchanges, not only of technological innovations that go across these geographies, and also the learning curve will improve for them. And so far, the funding requirement that these startups have been asking about is the starting point. And I have not seen anybody asking for sustainability regarding that. So once it is rolled out, I believe the monetization methods can be worked out by themselves. And see, at the end of the day, this money-making process will be there for any kind of solution that is rolled out in place. If it is not viable for the customers, that this much of spending is not going to fetch them any dividend, so that thing will never take place in real life.
Thank you. Kishore, you had a sort of a burning comment.
Yeah, on smart metering, because I've been part of this ecosystem last 30 years. So in India now, everybody thinks we are going great guns, but the ground reality is quite different. Interestingly, yes, government has a real pressure and focus on deploying 250 million smart meters, which is a very big number, brings in everybody like, honeybees and all that. But the fact is, there's still lack of standards in between the real. When we talk about smart meter, we do not have standard on the communication. We do have a data exchange protocol, which is DLMS standard. But then when we talk about which communication technology, like RF mesh or this thing, we still do not have it, and nobody has bothered. Even National Smart Grid Mission has not bothered about it. And as a result, what happened when they needed to go big orders? What they said, they had to, fine-tune their own narrative. Okay, smart meter guy needs to have interoperability with a couple of HES people. HES person needs to have interoperability with a couple of meter vendors and the upper MDM level. But I think we are moving to a different times altogether, where utility architecture is going digital. And these HES and MDM, the head-end system and the meter data management platforms that they're talking, they're old architecture, old IT technology which are passe now. And with this, how will they really, the deployment that they do today will actually get seamlessly integrated into tomorrow's digital utilities? That is another thing. And the communication is, finally, for getting empaneled, they demonstrate some limited interoperability. Right. But when there's a final tender, we do not know whose meter would be selected, whose HES would be selected, whose MDM. And then they'll have to struggle again to bring interoperability with all this thing. And I think so standards do take a pivotal role. Right. And one of the things, when contextualizing it to smart city, now the same thing. But why should I have a separate communication standard for metering? Why can't I have a common communication standard?
No, I understand. I think what you've just done is to actually give some strength to the argument that procurement systems are a good entry point. I think Arindam would also say that if procurements are taking place, in a sense there's demand, then the ecosystem will respond to that demand, and people will find ways to actually. So demand generation, in some sense, is what cities really need to do. Lohit, I want to just come to you, I'm harking back a few years, and I'm hoping that you do have some memory of that. Siemens participated in the city of Eluru in Andhra Pradesh. You might be aware of that.
Yes.
And that was through a Swiss challenge. Just taking the procurement argument forward, does Siemens see that there is possibly a future for those kinds of arrangements? I know Eluru went southwards, but that's because you guys were breaking new ground. But do you see Swiss challenges at all as being ways that Indian cities might procure?
I think situation has changed now. There are a lot of improvements we see. And definitely we expect better and better mode of engagements in bringing in solutions to the Indian cities, right? When we talk about innovation, definitely standards or the process will be kind of hindrance for innovation, right? And when we bring in standards, it's not so easy that, we are talking about smart meters. So getting data from meters, it's not same as, getting data from a pump, controlling a light, the temperature sensors. So they're all different, right? And badly we need a standard, something which works like how our UPI stack is, right? It should offer us to monetize. There should be incentives, and it will encourage startups and even the larger organizations to bring in their innovations along with standards. And you mentioned about the security, privacy and all of it. So without that incentive or the monetization model benefits, I think it's going to be difficult. But UPI is a good example. It's a very good example. So we have a lot of applications, platforms using it, but there are no issues of, standardization, the way they exchange information, all of it. It is all seamless. So we need that kind of framework. Of course, there are being tried out. Web3, for example, it's a model which is open source coming up. for making the city models, the data model, to bring in all this different variety of data and standardize the way of storing, and then how do you process and make use of it for further analysis and take actions on it, right? So this is the cycle. And then when it comes to standards, UPI is a classic example, and we all have to bring in the expertise from the European standards, and of course so what we are experiencing in India. So the thing is, if we don't take a step, I heard a conversation there over tea that a crime happening in one city is recorded in a camera, but when the same vehicle is moved to other city, there is no way to track, right? And it is gone. But think that if we are not recording that itself, and the incident is not recorded or the vehicle is not recorded in the other city, there is no way of thinking about exchanging this information. Today we are there, so we are recording that incident is there, but we are talking about how do we exchange this information or put it together, correlate and say that this vehicle has moved from this city to this city committing this crime, right? So we are there right at the point where we are defining that layer of interoperability. It's been standardized in manufacturing industry, for example, Industry 4.0. There are protocols standardized for machine connectivity, bringing into HMIs and the dashboards, the web layer, real-time monitoring. All these aspects are covered very well there. So when it comes to smart cities, there are different type of data use cases being addressed, and it's also about people acceptance and the skillful workers. So that's an important aspect. So implementation, once the installation is done, it's all fine, all live. But then what happens after that? Who will manage that? If a sensor is not working, if a meter is failed, how do we troubleshoot that? Where is the workforce for that? So the workforce is not trained enough. We need to bring in that skill also in the institutions where we are training the workforce. So that those are critical part which are essential.
Thanks,
I would say.
Thanks for bringing in that element of the trained manpower or trained human resource we need to actually also work in these ecosystems, because we tend to forget that. And the standardization of skill sets, which is required and the skilling programs need to address, is an important missing piece, because we need to look at life cycle operations of these networks. And as I mentioned in my remarks in the last session, growth. Unless we've got a sort of availability of captive skills, we're not going to be able to grow as per standards as well. So we are coming to the last few minutes of our session. We have another 5 minutes. Yeah.
Can I react to Lohit?
Oh, sure, please do.
I'm so sorry, reacting, perhaps. But I see it's unfortunate, because the problem statement that you gave, really, that is already solved by the standard we have been talking about in the previous session and all year long. The 1M2M is a national standard, for that matter, right now in India. 1M2M has been pushed in BIS by MOHUA since, as we mentioned there, smart cities. Yeah, smart cities are state subjects. It is not forced upon them. It is basically they are supposed to adopt it. Now RFPs are also mentioning 1M2M. The problem statement that you gave, that a camera, a person, a particular vehicle detected involved in a particular crime, and it goes to another city, it goes undetected. These can all be solved if they follow a simple regimen of following that standard at that particular layer. Now, this standard is not, enforcing itself on the business use cases. It's just a middle layer standard. So all innovations, the first thing, the basic resistance is about that. The basic resistance, as Kishorji mentioned, that everybody thinks that a standard will impede innovation.
Yep.
Contrastingly, the open standards, horizontal standards actually promote innovations. It doesn't enter into a business use case space, but it enables you. All that you have been doing. So what the standard does, you are doing all ground up coding, everything you are doing everything that perhaps the standard is offering. but the standard is offering as a standardized interface, as a service function. So the way clouds have emerged today, the way Android has emerged, it gives you what? It gives you all that platform on which youngsters are developing applications which you are using on your smartphones. Right. So this particular standard is giving that on a platter for you. It's a toolkit. Create applications that you want to use, create your own innovations in the business space, roll it out faster, because the time to deliver will be much shorter if you follow that standard. Unfortunately, companies like Siemens, I'm saying like Siemens, not Siemens alone, companies like Siemens are actually being a big resistance to this, because they are sitting on big money. They are already doing proprietary implementation solutions, which they are afraid, I'm sorry to say, they are afraid that once it opens up with standardization, the small players will compete with us, and they might offer the solution at a much lower rate than we are offering. So the moolah that goes into Siemens' large kitty might get distributed across so many startups, right? Sorry to say.
No, I think that's fantastic. We've got to that point in the session where we are provoking each other.
Lively,
no, absolutely, of course. And we've also been given another 10-15 minutes to continue this conversation. I think Andreas wants... before you do that, because Andreas just raised his hand. Sure. Andreas, go ahead. You have some intervention.
Yeah, thank you for getting the floor. So I was also triggered by Lohit, whose comment, about the missing standard, and also mentioning or referring to Industry 4.0. Maybe just giving a bit of history on for example, 1M2M, and I can also fully support Arindam, what he said before. Sorry. 1M2M started already in 2012. So at this point in time, Industry 4.0 didn't even know about the problems they have in the future. So we have really quite a long history about thinking about problems and solve them, so it's quite advanced standard. And just to explain it a bit in, let me say, practical terms, what you can think of 1M2M is really something like the operating system you have on your smartphone. So, and this is actually decoupling, let me say, exactly, and also involving, let me say, the ecosystem we all want to have startups, for example, developing something around a standard. So the application is coming from for example, a startup which is based on 1M2M, and what you said with the sensors, switching on a light in a city, is the same as switching on a light, for example, in a house or in an industry plant. So it's just a matter of abstraction, and this abstraction is done exactly by 1M2M. So it's offering some interfaces towards the sensors and offering interfaces towards the cloud. So it's really a very versatile standard, and India did a good decision to promote this in India, for example. And I think this is also necessary in other areas, because as we see, some big companies sometimes don't want standards, or even don't know about those standards. And it's important that the policymakers are pretty, let me say, giving guidance on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Andreas. Lohit, you want to respond?
Yeah. I'm not going to comment on the financial positions of Siemens and what they do, because I'm not the person here, right?
It speaks for itself.
So, keeping that part aside, you might be experiencing the sales force, which is coming and, responding to RFPs and dealing with this ecosystem to implement the projects and things like that. But I am representing a community which deals with innovation, and I personally have engaged with startups to bring in their solutions and then implementing in different part of the world, right? Specifically in smart cities. I can give their names, but it is reality. The fact is, it takes time to open up, because it is not possible to survive for long resisting such kind of innovations, right? It is impossible. So we tried creating innovation hub within Siemens organization itself as a drive. Next 47 was the organization helping us to create a company within Siemens and encourage innovations. But then it's not so fruitful, I would say, and we are looking outside partnerships and adopting this innovation from them as well, right? When it comes to scale, as you were quoting that cities are looking for references, where have you implemented this, right? What is the scale of the project? When this kind of question comes in, it's a challenge for startups, right? So being the taking the first step in this domain.
Finally. Welcome. Sorry.
So yeah, taking first step in this business for startups, bringing that kind of references will be challenging. So there is a need of collaboration between such experience and innovation from the entire community is a need, right? And there is no resistance, at least I would say, from the innovation community point of view, from Siemens. So I can vouch for it.
Okay.
That's my answer.
Thanks, Lohit. We have another 10 minutes, right?
So I think, can I respond also?
Just 1 second.
Yeah.
We've just been joined by Wim de Kessel,
Yeah.
who I think got delayed in the previous session.
Yeah, in some other session.
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
for us.
So before you go to him, just 1 minute
Sure.
only.
Yeah.
So I think what they were talking about, that interoperability and all that, I think in smart city standard, there are two things are very important from technological point of view as well as from standardization point of view. Semantic interoperability and system level standard. When we talk about semantic interoperability, most of the ecosystems have got intra-domain semantic interoperability well done, dusted and achieved. But in city needs inter-domain semantic interoperability.
Sure, that's too theoretical for me. I can't.
So semantic is meaning. The meaning of what you're communicating, the information,
What you're saying
essence,
is there's complexity in this.
complexity in that, and that needs to be done, but not only at the cloud level, at the IT level, but right from device level, which our unified digital infrastructure standards have done it. But we need more system standards than siloed product-oriented standards.
Okay, thank you. That helps a lot, and perhaps that even sets up what I'm going to request Wim to share with us. Wim, you're president of standards at Legrand, and in some sense, if I can use a pun, you know about switching between systems. But in that sense, you're also the gatekeeper of standards. I mean, a switching technology company knows exactly how standards operate in reality. Share with us a quick thought. I'm sorry, I'm not going to summarize what's been already said, but we started with reflections just like this. Share with us some thoughts that you have about how standards are operating currently in the ecosystem, perhaps in the geography where you work, and how the India-EU partnerships might yield some useful initiatives with regard to promoting standards.
Well, yeah, for me, everything starts with the regulation. Sorry to go a bit further off.
Margot talked about regulation, so
Yeah.
please do.
So it all starts with regulations, and the regulations are referring to standards. So even before the regulations, you need to have the policy. So where do you as a community want to go? What is the objective? What's the need of the community? And really the policy, it's the basis of everything. That's the direction. Then you need to decline this into regulations, and I like to see the way regulations are made in Europe, and this is with very high level, clear objectives, but please don't go into the details because it's impossible to cover everything. Details are in the standards. So if the regulations are referring to standards, there is where you put the how and the what and the limits. That is essential. And there is also such that, the policies, that's high level by the politics. The regulator need to translate it into the regulations, and the standards are right in the standards. And then finally, using this complete ecosystem to ensure that the products you put on the table, the products you put in the market are compliant. And what is extremely important is that we are, especially around topics like all the smart things, that we are not diverging too much country by country. Because the one thing which is very national is the internet, but that is now a thing which goes from one end to the other over the whole globe. So the cybersecurity is as important in India as in Europe or Latin America or in Australia. So it's very important that we also have there a kind of a harmonization in terms of legislation also, because the objectives and finally should be the same, only we don't have that. And that's the main objective, it's the main benefit of Europe, that for the 27 countries, plus the EFTA countries, of course, we have one regulation, and that is so great. One regulation referring to one standard, having access to that complete market. If we now could put this also on the international level, which we do with the standards, of course, that's a first step. But I do think that the basic for that, being the regulations, should also be harmonized as much as possible on a global level, especially for those services which are global.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Wim. That gives us a good springing board for I think my last question, in which I'd like to engage all of you. Before you came in, Wim, we talked about also the tendency of big players in the market to corner the market, so to speak. I mean, this is an old economics problem. But having said that, now standards are also going to allow for a proliferation of many innovators and startups and such like. And there is a whole ecosystem that Orindam, for instance, is involved in actually supporting. I want to just come to one key point. I mean, we are talking at a time when a lot of countries are in Dubai at the COP28, and they're talking about unified climate action. And this report that's been produced is also basically premised on the need for smart cities and smart technologies, standardization, all of that feeding into a larger sort of societal need, which is decarbonization. Now, there is an argument in decarbonization which also says that there is a need for people to also look at off-grid infrastructure, right? While we talk about standardization as a way to bring larger and larger systems together and integrate them, there is resilience in off-grid as well, and decentralization in that way. So isolation is not necessarily a bad thing if you're in the mountains somewhere, or if you're in the desert. Trying to connect to the whole thing, to the whole network, doesn't make that much sense, except in telecom, of course. But having said that, what I want to understand from each one of you, really, is that where do you place your bets? Are we headed towards more and more integration at national levels like in India? Are we headed towards a balance between decentralization and centralization? What, in your estimation, is going to work better with regard to technology rollouts, with regard to markets, with regard to also the ability to be resilient in the face of shocks that are coming from climate? And again, I'll turn to Andreas to set the ball rolling on that question. Andreas?
Thank you for giving me the word. I like the clear structure from Wim de Kessel. I think this is a really good way. Sometimes the way is left out for, let me say, the policy or the regulation making or recommending the right standards, because not all the standards need to be written on the first time. On your question on distribution or centralization, I think we will see a decentralized or more and more decentralized, let me say, world, especially in terms of energy and also in terms of resilience. So one of the, let me say, great decentralized, let me say, innovations in the past has been the internet. You know, we have seen it was developed also for a certain reason, and it's quite resilient. I think there is some resistance in the market for, especially in the energy market, to go towards this, because it's much easier to steer something as we have it now, with big power plants, for example. But with the renewables, we are going in sustainability. We probably go more and more into decentralized power plants. And as I flew in, for example, here to Japan, I saw a lot of power plants, PV power plants around. So you can see this also in other states. I flew over on the standardization trips. So I think this is the way we go. However, we need to build up those infrastructures that enable the communication between all those distributed plants on the consumer side and also on the producer side to make this happen. But it needs a behavior change. I heard the sentence before in one of the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Andreas. I'm glad that you've said behavior change for the third time. That's the, it does need to be, it bears emphasis and repetition as well. What's your take on this, Orindam?
Honestly speaking, I really don't understand this, this isolated entity. It's a connected world now we are moving towards. We are entering into a world of meta, where, physically and in the abstract way, we are connected. So once you have fragmented systems, those fragmented systems put together consume more energy than when you actually, harmonize it, collect it, and use. The concept of cloud actually has given a kind of feeling to everybody that the energy consumed in siloed data centers and siloed infrastructure was far more inefficient from an energy point of view as compared to a centralized cloud-based infrastructure. In IoT world also, the use case and the problem statement that we talked about talks about connected ecosystem. So I'm not very sure whether this kind of fragmented, isolated entities would end up in saving and creating a sustainable, kind of environmental ecosystem. So we have to treat carefully. We have to see to it that which is of benefit for us.
Okay, just to give some background to this, for instance, I'm an architect, so I keep track of what's going on in that world as well. And there are standalone communities. For instance, near San Diego, there's a whole community that's been built which is completely net zero, but standalone. It doesn't use its energy to connect as well because mobile telephony is available. So it doesn't have wires connecting it elsewhere. Right? It generates its own energy and uses it right there locally. Thank you. So I guess that's the kind of direction of movement also that's happening, while there's also the unification of larger systems. And that clearly comes back to what Wim said about regulations and policy. What is it that we want to achieve? Some years ago, we had the entire northern grid fall, because of some technical failure. That's the kind of scenario in which the need to isolate different parts of the grid was recognized, and technically a solution was found.
Microgrids are something that I understand.
So it's always a tug of war in some sense between the larger system and the components of that system needing their own independence. It's a bit like democracy.
I didn't talk about a larger system. What I was talking about is connected system. Edge computing is the way to go.
Sure. So what I want to understand is where do you see this going from the perspective of resilience? Margot, how has the European Union thought through this particular problem? I'm sure it's not unfamiliar to you.
Thank you. I don't know if you are all familiar with the CyberSyn project, which was in the 70s in Chile. There was a scientist from the then telematics scientist from the Silicon Valley who had convinced President Allende that it would be nice if he could control from the presidential palace all the economic activity of the country. Transportation, factory production, movement of people, etc. And they really had installed a whole big centralized system, which was quite interesting. Of course, CIA had different plans for President Allende than the ones he was thinking of, so we never saw the actual fruition of this project. But this was the epitome of centralization. I'm not, and it's a very interesting story. Actually, I encourage you to read more about this. It's extremely interesting. I'm not sure this is where we're moving, and I'm not sure I know how to answer your question. What I know is I've been in standardization long enough to hear about intelligence at the core, intelligence at the edge, intelligence this, intelligence that. I don't know how to answer your question basically, so I tried this excursus on Project CyberSeam just to give an example.
No, thank you. I think the Chile example is really an interesting sort of prompt. Wim, any thoughts you'd like to offer on this?
Yeah, I don't think it needs to be a target. It needs to be a means, centralized or not centralized. It's the means, and the means means that you want to solve a problem. And if you have disaster recovery, then isolation is very interesting. But if you want to have redundancy, then you should not be isolating. On the contrary, then you need to integrate. So I think it definitely needs to be something which is a combination where you can isolate when you need and combine if you need. And in terms of and then you also have the specific applications. As you said, high in the mountains, somewhere deep in the woods or in the jungle, well, there is nothing. The only thing what you can do nowadays very easily is photovoltaic, some batteries, and you're off. Putting a grid in place is extremely expensive. By doing so the standalone setup, you can really give a lot of advantages and opportunities to local communities which they don't have because the grid is not there. So I would say, depending the issue you want to solve, make sure that you make the right decision. But being able to make compartments where you have isolation possible is definitely interesting in certain ways.
Thanks. So we certainly need not an individual like the president of Chile, but certainly some kind of organizations or networks that have an overview of all of this. Because who decides about every component? And I think in that regard, it will be interesting for us to also address. And I sort of heard the idea of agility in what you said, and a good friend Martin started this Open Agile Smart Cities out of Aarhus University, and I find that very compelling as an idea. But from the system design perspective itself, what is this issue of agility, and how does it even factor into design? Can I quickly ask Kishore, but very quickly, very short.
I'll give you, first of all, I think India is got the largest grid, and one nation, one grid, one frequency. Now, but in 2012, we had a major cascading effect of, because one plant shut down and they were tripping all across north and maybe some part of central India. From there, we learned the islanding, what we was talking about. Islanding and isolation, they are two different things. Okay. Islanding capability has to be there even in the larger grids and networks. And same, we talk in network, communication network, we call it that, demilitarized zones and all those kind, having some kind of islanding impact there. Okay. So the thing is, we are going to have all of the central grids and central stations are going to be there, but we are always going to need smaller independent solutions or generation plants. We are talking smaller nuclear plants also today. Why? Because it may distributed energy also generation and consumption adds to a lot of energy efficiency at the transmission and distribution scale. Right. So I think we are going to have both of them. And as I think Wim also rightly said, it's where do we need what? Okay. If it's isolated, you better have it as isolated thing.
Fantastic. So you're also resonating with what Wim said. Absolutely. Essentially, at the end of the day, somebody's got to do that regulation and write that policy.
But yes, you need to have an overall this thing. Right. Not simply only centralized or only decentralized. Nothing like that.
And what, if I can move to Lohit. Lohit, as a company, Siemens, how do you look at regulators and institutions that actually implement policies in the Indian context? How are you viewing this?
Yeah, I think I second Wim and of course Kishore. So it's the hybrid approach we should take. And when it comes to grid, right, isolation makes sense, and we have instances, examples, how it helped, and how centralization of, let's say, data management. So that's a different use case altogether. So we need mix of this. So when we talk about data, managing at central place and executing the use cases at edge, both matters. So depending on the problem what we are solving, and of course, hybrid is the answer finally, but use case to use case, we have to take a call during the implementation or even the planning phase. That's my answer. Yeah.
Let me come to Arindam. Arindam, this question about the need for the institution or organization that has the best overview, right? You're part of the government of India. CDOT has a very important role to play in that sense. Do you view yourself as having line of sight on every single part of the ecosystem that you're commanding, or do you see dark spots which you're not able to penetrate? And how do you handle that? Do you network with other parts of the government of India? Do you network with the private or other networks?
We do, because we kind of act as a bridge between the government, who's actually governing. We are an R&D wing of Government of India. We engage. We were more corporate in our style of functioning rather than being government. So we function with our partners and even other ecosystem players who are from the private sector. We also interact with various government agencies because now we are in such a technology area which touches upon every part of, whether you call it industry ecosystem or common persons. So we are cutting across all. So while we are touching all aspects of it, I wouldn't say that we have an eye on everything. We cannot pinpoint every problem because we do not have that domain knowledge of every sector. So there we need those particular specialists or those departments who have got an eye on that. But collaborating with them gives us a kind of feeling that this might require a deeper insight into something, and we get that from them. So as I said, it is a networked world. So this also is a networked world. Nobody can create a policy sitting at a very, kind of pinnacle position and deciding everything. So it has to be a collaborative effort for the regulators also and for this policymakers also. So that is what my take is.
Fantastic. I think we can kind of rest at that point, which is a good networked policymaker, regulator that can actually have a commanding view of the whole ecosystem that needs to be integrated through standards. Yeah, and the standards are operating in many different ways, which we've all, I think, touched upon through the session. So I think with that, we'll take a few questions if there are any at all. Yes, please. And to whom are you addressing the question?
So I got stuck at when Kishorji talked about resistance to standards, and I haven't moved from there since then. So, so what I want to ask is that resistance to standards also means, issues in capacity building, right? Mm-hmm. And issues in capacity building means issues in implementation. So, it touches the entire circle. And I'm sure this is not the challenge only in India, but it must have been, and it still is a challenge in Europe as well. I want to ask, where are we in Europe and in India on this issue, and from your experience, how much time do we need to mature how much time do we need to reach the level of maturity? And I also understand that both Sensenelec and ETSI have started programs on integrating standardization related issues. On standards they have integrated it in colleges, in curriculum and all, and has it helped in any manner?
So I'll give you very quickly India scenario. Yeah, I know. I think it's a very valid.
Two questions, so you could answer just.
I'll answer from India side. So in India side, I think as I mentioned, the business case has not been properly made to the different classes of stakeholder, because for different classes of stakeholder, different kind of business case has to be presented. So that, but BIS has already started this journey. I'm very happy to see that, note that. Okay, they have started evangelizing it, and they have even started interacting with the institutions, started having standards chair in colleges and all that. But I think it will take quite some time. But the real stakeholder is industry and innovators, not the institutions alone. But this phenomena is global also. When we sit in IEC, ISO, we are talking developing standard, but stakeholders do. Why this standard on this topic? Why this? We get a lot of skepticism because people come with different perception, expectations in the global platforms. I'll stop at that.
I guess not everybody has to express an opinion on why standards, right? I mean, they could just use them. Wim, any thoughts on those two questions, or either of the two questions?
Well, it all depends on stakeholders, and finally, who's putting a lot of effort into this is the one who gets the benefit out of it. I mean, we are begging for consumers to join standardization, but they never do. We are asking for the SMEs to join standardization, but they don't do, because they say they think they're too small. No, get organized and make sure you're there. I'm a bit blunt coming from a multinational, but sorry, that's life. And it has to be also known that small companies in the past, in the 70s and the 80s, even before that, were present in standardization because they thought it was important. And it is important. I mean, my company has leading roles in IEC, in Senelec, and also on the national basis, because it is one of the fundaments of product development. Some of the fundaments to ensure that new products can come on the market in a safe way. And not working on standards means, in fact, that you're not opening the markets for new applications and new solutions. So it is essential, but people need to understand, and I think, therefore, education is essential, but you need education on a level of the academics. So in the curricula for lawyers, for marketeers, for engineers, for financial people, everywhere we need the knowledge of standardization to be put in. But that's one thing. Secondly, what is also essential is education of CEOs of companies, because those are the guys with the money in the pocket. Those guys need to know what are the benefits and what is the return on investment in the long run. But then you should be a CEO with a vision, and not a CEO being a salesman, because that guy is thinking about 5 days ahead. No, you need about 5 years ahead, 10 years ahead. That is standardization. Long term, make sure that you know where you want to go, and make sure that you know how the whole market is going to evolve, and having the interconnection with the competition, with the regulators. I mean, that is extremely important. And therefore also policy on a company level, but also on a country level, even on a regional level, is so important that we know where we need to go.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, please.
Two examples of standards. One is today's socket, electrical socket. So every country has got different mechanisms, but within a country, had it not been standardized, right, where would we be? Second example is our vehicles. Had we left it open for where the steering would be in a vehicle, would there be any policy how the roads will be constructed? Right. So certain standards require a regulatory backing and mandating. Standards primarily are voluntary in nature. So once it comes to a larger good for the country, there are certain standards have to be enforced, mandated. Here, the agencies and the government, or rather I should say the regulators and the policymakers, have to see which of these standards are for larger benefit for the masses. In that sense, they will have to mandate certain standards. A thought process has to begin, which has not started as yet.
Thank you, Arindam. So, standards as an economic imperative. There's the big economic case for this, and I think the fact that the report does talk, but I would say you need to expand the European Union's move towards a common market. That building of that market is really crucial, and we need to build understanding across the ecosystem about how important this is, right? I'm going to take a pause just to quickly check, are there any burning questions, issues, statements that any of the panelists want to make? Since there are no other questions, if you'd like to address any points, Wim, please.
Standardization, extremely important. Don't standardize everything.
Right.
Regulations are very important. Don't regulate everything.
Yeah.
I must say that imposing standards by the letter is dangerous because it kills innovation. You need to leave the opportunity for innovative people, innovative organizations to put new things in the market for which there is no standard, there is no regulation. So keep an open mind, make sure that we push for innovation because it's to the benefit of society.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's a very good way to close. Democracy affirming, freedom affirming, life affirming statement. Let's not be totalitarian about the systems we create. Fantastic. So we'll stop there. Thank you very much to all the panelists. Thanks, Wim, for joining us, albeit late. But you gave us some really wonderful points to close our discussion on.
Very good one-liners too.
Indeed. Oh, is there another?
Yeah. No.
Andrea.
Andrea.
Oh, Andreas, I'm so sorry. I forgot to glance at the screen. Andreas, do you want to say something, please?
There was a nice ending word, you know. My put on my term on top, or my 2 cents on top of this is we should also look for the right standards, you know, from the right area, because what we have seen now was in the discussion, we have mentioned IEC standards, we have mentioned also telecommunication standards, and sometimes there is a world in between. And also we can see this on the European side, you know. So there is this standardization request, you know, coming from EU for something which is already there, which is taken over by Senelec, for example, on IEC level. So sometimes we should cleverly look at those standards of being available, and before we start something new and reinventing the wheel.
Okay, great, Andreas. You've given us one more closing line. Let's not reinvent the wheel. If something exists, let's adapt or accept it. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much, and thank you, Andrea, as well, for being patient with us online. We'll close now.
Thank you.
And, with some mementos. Yeah. Please. I've already got one. Oh, I need to
To Orindam, yes. And
Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure.
I think Margot has already got, so, and so does Wim, but to Lohit. Thank you, Lohit.
Okay.
To Mr. Kishore Narang. So we can have 5 more trees in your name. You deserve it.
Wow, more than happy to have as many trees in my name. Thank you.
Congratulations. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think...
Who does this go to? Everybody's got.
I had one this morning, so I'm not going to carry more.
Because it doesn't carry the name, so it doesn't make any difference.
They don't care.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. So
Thank
this
you.
is for you.
No, I've already got one.
Okay.
It's all right.
All right. Thank you so much. And
Standardization, right? I mean, this is a standard.
yes. So we have almost finished on time, but the other 2 panels are still going on. But that gives us time for some more tea and coffee, and we can go back to the main hall where the valedictory session will take place. And I think we'll be wrapping it up pretty soon. So thank you so much.
Group photograph.
Yes.
Let's do the group photo.